Hey everybody! Today we're going to work on our shading with charcoal. Charcoal is probably the best medium for getting really nice, intense darks and high contrast, and that's what's going to bring your drawings to life. So let's get started. So today we're going to work with some white objects and we're going to do our drawing using charcoal. So I've got some vine charcoal. I've also got some black pastel and some white pastel. Those two we're going to use for accents later on, but for right now we're going to start with that nice vine charcoal. One of the things that I like to emphasize when I draw with charcoal, it's something that I learned when I was in art school that's really, really helpful, is to draw with the side edge of the charcoal rather than with it as a point, as if you were working with a pencil. Okay, when you draw with the side edge, you have more contact with your paper, your hand stays more steady, and you just end up with a much bolder result, which you'll see in just a minute. So the way that I typically will start is I'll block in my objects, put them in the position where I want them to be, and then from there, I'll go in and I'll start shading. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is get your objects placed. Second thing that you want to do is start to get those darks and middle values placed. Okay, so when I look at my cup that I've got over here that I blocked in, the shadow side is on the left. So I'm going to take my vine charcoal on its side and I'm just going to start to block in with some nice big strokes, some dark and middle dark values. Okay, as you know, your values are your darks and lights, and they're what make things look three-dimensional. Okay, the more bold darks that you have in there, the stronger your drawing is going to be. Okay, and we've got a little bit of a handle that's back here, so we can block that in. Then we can move over onto the egg. Now the egg also is going to have the shadow side on the left. Our light is coming this way, so that's going to be where our lighter side is. And we can either leave that as the white of the paper, or we can go on top of it and we can use some white pastel to pull out some highlights. But we're going to do that a little bit later after we've got more of this blocked in. So here's the start of our drawing. And the next thing that I want to do, because this is really, really important, is start to get those shadows that are on the table blocked in. Whenever you have any still life objects, doesn't matter what they are, you always want to get your shadows on the surface of whatever your objects are sitting on blocked in at the beginning, because that helps to anchor things. It helps to ground them so that they don't look like they're floating. Now, one of the things that's really nice about charcoal is it's a very, very forgiving medium. Okay, by that I mean if you make a mistake, you can just go right into it and you can make any adjustments that you need to. Okay, one of the ways that you can do that is by just going over and going on top of it, either with more charcoal, with some white pastel, or with some dark pastel, or you can use what's called a kneaded eraser. When you're using your kneaded eraser, you're not going to use it the way you might think of an eraser. Like, you're not going to go rub everything out and obliterate any mistakes that you want to have. You're going to use it instead as more of a drawing tool. So maybe you just need to clean up an edge. If you just shape the eraser so that it's got a little bit more of a point, you can do that. You can go in and you can just clean up any areas that need a little bit of refinement. You can even go in on top of your drawing and use it as a drawing tool. Let's say that you want to pop a little suggestion of a highlight somewhere. Pull out an edge along the rim of that cup. I can easily do that just by using a little bit of the charcoal to go in and carve out that shape. So when you're working with charcoal, you're working from dark to light, and you're using your lights to actually go in, and it's almost as if you're carving a piece of marble, and you're carving out the shapes, the forms, with your lights. Okay, so now that we've got our semi-dark and our middle values placed, what we're going to do is we're going to go in with some really, really nice dark, it's black new pastel, which is a hard pastel, and we're going to go into the areas where we really, really see some dark shadows. Your darkest shadows on the surface of the table are always going to be those that are really, really close to the objects. Okay, just by adding that little tiny bit of some dark in there, I've already given this a lot more of an anchored feeling onto the surface of the table. It made it pop a little bit more. I also see some pretty strong darks on the interior of that cup, so I'm going to start putting in some of that. And just by increasing the intensity and the darkness on the interior, that starts to make it look like it really does have an opening to it, that we can actually, feel like you can go into that. All right, this left side of the cup also has quite a bit of shadow on it. So I'm going to just put a little bit more of that in there, maybe a little bit more back here on the egg. Okay, and now it starts to really feel like it's getting three-dimensional. Whenever you have anything that you're drawing, whether it's a landscape, a still life, figures, whatever, it's always your dark values that you've really, really got to pay attention to, because those are what's going to give it some depth and some dimension and make sure that it doesn't look flat. Okay, so now's where we're going to have a little bit of fun with it. We're going to take this nice white pastel and we're going to just drag lightly over in the areas where we kind of want to get a little bit of a middle range of some of those values. It's a little bit more of a transition. And then in the places where we really see some intense highlights, if you just press hard, because it's all about how much pressure you put on with the charcoal or with the pastel, you can go in and you can really make things start to pop in those areas where you maybe see some highlights, like on the surface of a ceramic cup like this, maybe in the bottom where there's some light that's just catching the edge of that rim. On the egg, this top part of it here, we don't want to draw an outline around it. Instead, what we can do is we can drag a little bit of this white pastel, and then we can even put a little bit of a highlight on it to make it look like it's got the light just catching that little area of it. And here we can soften the transition from light into dark just by dragging over it. Notice I'm not doing this or rubbing it with my finger. If you do that, all you're going to end up with are messy hands and a drawing that's probably going to look really smudgy and a little bit on the muddy side. So if you want to keep your drawing nice and clean, instead of rubbing it with your finger, just drag a little bit of that nice soft white pastel on top of it, and that'll give you sort of a transitional tone from one value into the next. Now, the other thing that we can always do in order to make things pop a little bit more is to add a little bit of background into it. Okay, so now watch what happens when I get really, really brave and go in there and just start to pop the background. Okay, I'm going to put it on a dark background. I'm sure if you've ever looked at any old masters' paintings of still lifes and things like that, oftentimes they'll do just that. They'll paint things on a dark background, because what that does is that just gives a lot of drama to the lighting, to the shadows, and just makes things get really, really nice and very, very bold. So now when I do that, what ends up happening is my shadows that I had on the table, they're going to fade out a little bit. So I'm going to have to go back in and just pop some of that contrast. Okay, and so then to do that, I'm going to do it with this nice dark pastel. Just go right back into it, pop those darks a little tiny bit. Okay, notice I'm using that side edge of the charcoal. You don't want to hold it like a pencil. You want to just work with the side edge to keep those nice, big, bold strokes in there. And then the last thing that I'm going to do is any edges that need cleaning up. Let's say that I didn't make that ellipse perfect, or my hand slipped or whatever. Go right back in with my darks and with my white pastel to just clean my edges up a little tiny bit. There we go. That's a nice little egg. And then we're just about done. There we go. Okay. Well, I told you that was going to be a little messy, but that's okay. It'll wash out and we got a nice drawing. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.